This talk is going to deal with utilizing multiple records from the same time frame and show how they can bring results, especially in urban areas where addresses are so crucial. Sometimes it can be difficult to find our relatives in the various record sets that exist, and using a pseudo-algebraic equation might help us figure out, if we know two variables, to figure out the third, or if we know a constant, figure out a variable, just like a times b equals c. If you know a and c, you can figure out b. We're going to be looking at some records from New York City. And I always start with census records. I find them to be the go-to starting point for any research question. Try to find everybody in every census they ever were in. That includes state and local, if that was done, and if a church or a parish did a religious census and that's accessible, I would access it. And remember, census records were created to collect demographic information to alert officials in an area how many people were under their supervision. So that area could be a locality, it could be a state, it could be a county, it could be a country. And the U.S. Census primarily exists to allot the number of seats each state will have in the House of Representatives. We just had a census in 2020 and the numbers are out, so we know which states are losing House seats and which states are gaining seats for the 2022 election. The United States Constitution mandates that a federal census is carried out every 10 years. City directories are another helpful resource we're going to be talking about today, and they were created to provide a list of residents in a locality with varying degrees of information. Primarily male head of households were listed, but others were included. Many widows were listed with the name of their late husband in parentheses, and depending on the year and locality, even female domestic servants might have been listed. This annual snapshot of residents particularly helps those with urban ancestors. They also had sections that detailed where businesses, churches, and other organizations were located. If you think your ancestor or one of your collateral relatives was prominent in an organization, such as the Women's Temperance League or a political party, look under the political party or the organization's entry in the city directory and see who the leadership was. You might find your relative's name there. And vital records are the last record we'll be looking at, more or less, and they were collected by health departments to serve communities often faced with epidemics and other crises. They eventually would regularly provide the names of parents, addresses, and occupations, among other things. The two websites that prove extra useful are located at cityrecord.engineering.nyu.edu, and those are copies of the City Record, which was a court newspaper for New York City in the 19th and 20th centuries. Can be found there, early 20th centuries. And then the digitalcollections.nypl.org, as the New York Public Library has made digital copies of the city directories for New York City for the 19th century and the 20th century as well, parts of available. Might go earlier than 1800, I can't remember exactly, but it's a very extensive collection, and those are both accessible through those websites. And here's an example of the City Record. It's the official journal. And every fall, they would have to run a list of registered voters for the year. And here on Wednesday, October 27th in 1886, was that year's listing. So this is the 20th Assembly District. So there were several pages before for the previous 19 Assembly Districts. And within each Assembly District are a varying number of election districts. Because just like today, you vote for certain election races based on where you live. So they had to have an accurate listing of your address, and this would run in the paper annually. So if your ancestor was a registered voter, meaning he was male in this time period and either a native born citizen or a naturalized citizen, this is definitely a resource you want to consider looking at, because sometimes they're hard to find and they're not always in the city directory every year. But if they voted, and a lot of people had jobs that were because of political patronage, one of the expectations that the political party is going to have is that you're going to show up and vote. So, you have the job, as a custodian at the school because, you're a member of our party. Well, you have to do your part and make sure you vote every year. So they do seem to be, quite numerous in these records year after year after year, and you can track them and see how they move. And that's why, with one of the questions I had a family where the child died in February of 1888 as a 15-month-old baby, and the family purchased a grave at Calvary Cemetery across the river in Woodside, Queens, and he did not have a civil birth certificate, so I could not find his baptismal certificate. He was the second of 10 children born to the couple. The first 3 children died in infancy or toddlerhood. None of them would have gone to school. And then the 7 subsequent children all survived adulthood. So they had a rough start, but then their 7 final children all grew to adulthood. And I had baptismal entries for 9 of the 10 children. And I just, for completion, I wanted to know who his godparents were. Might his godmother or his godfather have been a relative of his father and mother and been helpful in my research. But I knew that if he was 15 months old in February, that he was probably born in November of 1886 if he died in February of 1885. And he was not baptized at the church of his older sister nor the church of his younger sister, the third child. So I was kind of stumped. And then I stumbled upon that this record was online just for this year. And I knew that his father was a naturalized citizen as of 1884 and that he should show up. So I did look, and the key there is showing that at 868 2nd Avenue, Michael Gillen is a registered voter there. And I was pretty excited. Okay, so now I know a place. Now, what Catholic churches served this area? And as luck would have it, the church St. Boniface was actually right near that address on 2nd Avenue. So I emailed them, and they, within a couple of days, the Church of the Holy Family is the successor parish as the population density shifted and St. Boniface no longer could support a full congregation. The parish was absorbed by a parish that didn't exist in 1886 called the Church of the Holy Family, and it gives its address there at 315 East 47th Street, which is where it currently resides. And they found that a John Gillel, it's actually Gillen with an N, the child of Michael Gillel and Anne Feerick, was born in New York on the 20th day of November, 1886, and was baptized at St. Boniface Church on the 28th day of November. So this is a transcription that Father Murray, the current pastor from a few years ago, found and signed, and it's very helpful and useful. But since then, the actual scanned images for these records have become available online. So I did go ahead and avail myself to look at the actual record, and it does say Gillel. He didn't misread it. It's very clear that it's Gillel. So I think what happens a lot of times, I saw a priest recently when I was visiting a parish for research. I went to Mass and then asked Father if I could look at the registers after the fact, and he's like, sure, I'll drive you back to the rectory, but I have a baptism in 75 minutes, but that should be enough time. So he had the notes, on his little card. So if he was in a rush and his handwriting was difficult to read, I'm assuming in 1886 something similar might have happened, that the name was misspelled. Gillel and Gillen do sound definitely different. So there was no, information on the original entry for the digital image that the transcription missed, but you always want to double check if you have the opportunity. And you do see that there are no notations of marriage. This child, as we know, died at 15 months of age. But by Comparing the dates of what we know that on October 27th, 1886, in the newspaper, it said that his father was living at 868 2nd Avenue. And we know from the baptismal entry that presumably on the 20th of November, 1886, the baby was born at home, which just a few weeks later one would presume would be 868 2nd Avenue. And as I mentioned, the church of St. Boniface was located at 882 2nd Avenue. So I don't know that they could have lived much closer to the church than they did. And that christening took place on the 28th of November, 1886. So again, you always work from knowns to unknowns. And what we knew is that we had a child who was 15 months old in February of 1888 when he died. So that would mean he was born most likely in November of 1886. And we knew that this family was Catholic, and we knew that the father was a registered voter, and we were able to find through the voter rolls that his father lived at an address very near a Catholic church, and sure enough, that's where the baptism was. So the child's baptismal sponsors, neither of them was named Gillen or Feerick, so they may have been cousins or an in-law, but it's not or a married sister. The godmother may have been a married sister of either of the parents, but I wasn't able to glean any more information. But I was able to check off on my checklist of the 10th child. I did find the christening, and all thanks to using what I knew to discover what I didn't know. Another example, and this time this is a city directory for the year ending May 1st. So this would have been printed in 1889 and is hypothetically good until May 1st of 1890. And as you can see, the image doesn't come out the best, but on page 138, the Benson entry is what I was looking for. And I was hoping to find James Benson Watchman, and he's listed as being at 303 East 36th Street. And again, I apologize that the image isn't very good. This will be the only time I'll use it in this talk. If I can find a better image, I'll use it in subsequent ones. But we do see that the gentleman that we're looking for in 1889 and 90 is supposedly living at 303 East 36th Street. Then the subsequent year, the year ending May 1st, 1891, is a year where, for whatever reason, James D. Benson is not listed in that year's edition of the city directory. But we did know that he voted, and we were able to find him voting in that year in 1890 on October 29th, again on Wednesday. The official journal of the city record printed its supplement list of registered voters for the year 1890. And in the 18th Assembly District, in the 22nd District, I believe a election division, at 242, follow the key, at 242 East 36th Street, there's James D. Benson is listed as a voter. And ironically, on the same day as printed in the newspaper, at 242 East 36th Street, a child named James Downs Benson was born to his father, James Benson, and his mother, Catherine Benson, the former Catherine McGrath, both of Ireland. And this is the 5th child born to the couple, and now 4 are living. So we know that on October 29th, the family must have still been living at 242 East 36th Street. And why this is important is because in 1890, in that time period, a subsequent census was taken to try to question the results of the June 2nd, 1890 federal census that New York thought was too low. And we see here a list of the addresses that James Benson was known to live at based on city directories, the voter rolls, and the birth certificate. We're also able to scratch off that not every book from the 1890 police census survives, and one of the addresses that is known to have been lost was this side of the block of East 36th Street in the 200 range. So unless it's hidden on a shelf somewhere and somebody's just missed it, I'm not going to find this family in the 1890 police census, but I've done my due diligence and found them in every record I could, and I'm firmly confident that that is the situation.